Jennifer Rubin has raised an important issue that concerns, among other things, the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, which prohibits illegal search and seizure. There are all sorts of things that have to be the work before someone can be investigated by the state in a democracy, in a free society. The Fourth Amendment specifically prohibits certain types of activities against citizens. If you're law enforcement and you want to investigate a crime, investigate a person you may think is involved in a crime, there's certain procedures that have to be followed, and they're enumerated in the Fourth Amendment. But as Jennifer pointed out in a column, I don't know when she wrote it, but she's talking about the criminalization of abortion that the Supreme Court is about to announce to the world for American women, and the enforcement nightmare that's coming with that. And she makes clear that one reason free people don't give government the power to interfere and control intimate decisions is because the decisions and conduct are, by definition, closely guarded information, not widely available, and not subject to the usual enforcement measures. I mean, personal stuff. Who you marry, the race of the person you marry, what you do with your reproductive organs, that sort of thing. So the effort to investigate and enforce a law criminalizing a woman's reproductive decisions becomes by definition an exercise in dictatorial or authoritarian excess, or as I would call it, fascist Christianity. My God, we're so close to this. And Jennifer wants us to consider what it would take to prove a woman had an illegal abortion. Would a search warrant be issued for her phone and computer to see what doctors and healthcare providers she had consulted? Would housekeepers or relatives or friends be interrogated about her menstrual cycle? And it's, I don't believe, oh my goodness. It's not clear, Jennifer points out, whether states would respect doctor-patient confidentiality. This abortion ban that's coming clearly implies that that is a thing of the past, doctor-patient confidentiality. What will they do, subpoena a doctor? Does everyone from the office assistant up to the doctor get grilled about a woman's medical history, her gynecological history? How about security cameras in offices? And the video will be reviewed to see when and if she went in and out of a provider who offers abortion services. Are they going to subpoena insurance records, travel records, bank records? Do you understand what's coming? Does all this sound too extreme? Truth seekers, let's not kid ourselves. Let's not continue to be in this goddamn coma that we're in. It's not clear how states would go about enforcing the law unless they did this. Jennifer writes, whenever the government has attempted to control women's reproduction, an extraordinary degree of surveillance, intrusion, and spying has been required. Now, she uses a couple of examples, and they're both from totalitarian states. Romania's communist dictator, Nicolae Ceausescu, he issued this infamous decree in 1966, Decree 770, which was trying to gin up the country's birth rate. Do you remember what happened afterwards? Do you remember the videos from the 70s of the orphanages in Romania where children had been, there was no birth control, there was no abortion, where babies had been dropped off, and the mental and emotional and psychological condition that these kids were in now that they were 2 and 4 and 5 and 7 years old. Do you remember those videos? And then China's one-child policy and the army of snoopers that the Chinese communists had to employ against their own citizens to make sure that this edict from the dictator was being followed. Oh my God. So whenever laws like this are passed, it always requires an army of people to launch this assault on privacy that should belong to every citizen. Now, a lot of people will say, I apologize for my voice. I'll tell you later. The people will say, look, the United States is not a police state. We're not Romania in the 60s. We're not China in the 70s and 80s. We have due process. We have a constitution. That's true, but as soon as a prosecutor or police officer in a deep red state finds probable cause in a case involving a woman who allegedly has had an illegal abortion, a state judge can issue a warrant, and it will all be technically correct and procedurally pristine, but the crime that will be investigated takes place in a woman's womb. So, I mean, the enforcement mechanism, by definition, by necessity, is going to be unbelievably intrusive. And as Jennifer points out, if that's where we are heading, there won't be a right to privacy. That'll be considered quaint. A right to privacy to prevent such intrusion into the lives of women and people around them. And remember, Texas was oh so slick when they passed their anti-abortion law. It's a state that offers bounties. Private citizens can be the ones who to inform on their neighbors or relatives. The state legislature has created a ruse that individuals seeking a reward for finding abortion law violators are not, those people are not so-called state actors. They're not law enforcement. They're not elected representatives. So if that holds up, this bounty shit, then the Fourth Amendment goes out the window entirely. Because the Fourth Amendment is protection of the citizen against the state. There is nothing that protects a citizen against another citizen in a case like this. Private bounty hunters are not restricted by the Fourth Amendment. Do you see what these devils have done? Jennifer says this: given the impossibility of policing all pregnancies and running down every accusation, the discretion put in the hands of individual prosecutors will be enormous. It's an invitation to selective prosecution. For example, do you really think the rich white daughter of a prominent business person will be hauled into court? Now, some of the prosecutors involved in this crap will play from Les Miserables, will play Inspector Javert harassing and menacing women. Other prosecutors will choose to look the other way, which will make further mockery of a law meant to chill conduct, but will be impossible to enforce, except in the cases where the prosecution decides to proceed. So what happens? Well, ultimately we wind up with a society of snitches suspicion, spying on each other, distrust. For example, when this Texas bounty bill was first passed, Robin Fretwell Wilson, University of Illinois Law School, wrote this, quote, "The encouragement of voluntary espionage between neighbors hints at forms of totalitarianism that most Americans would publicly rail against." She went on, "North Korea utilizes citizens as spies to inform the government of anti-government behavior of their fellow citizens. While the penalty there is certainly much greater, potential public execution, the underlying mechanism is the same, promoting fear and mistrust among neighbors." End quote. So if you think this is unnecessarily alarmist, what Jennifer Rubin has written, what people have been talking about since it became apparent what this Catholic Supreme Court is doing. 7 Catholics, 2 Jews. This Catholic Supreme Court, what it's going to do. If you think this is just alarmist bullshit, you got to ask yourself this: how do you think cases will be proved and prosecuted? If a woman gets an abortion once the Supreme Court says it's illegal? And do you trust the crowd that determined that there is no life of the mother exception? Do you trust them to exercise restraint in investigating doctors and women's crimes of abortion? Do you realize what is coming? Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcast. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.